The first warning manifested as a silent query within the vast consciousness of Argus 3. Perched in geosynchronous orbit, a silent guardian over the Pacific, it observed the celestial sphere with the unwavering patience of a lighthouse keeper scanning the sea. Its world was one of patterns, of predictable vectors and thermal signatures, of station attitudes and the balletic dance of tugs and tankers. Everything had a place, a purpose, a trajectory logged and understood. The containers did not. They slouched into the solar system from the cold, dark depths beyond the Kuiper Belt, their decaying arc a testament to an efficiency that defied any known human propulsion profile. They were silent, cold, and anonymous. Argus noted their vector, flagged the anomaly with a digital equivalent of a raised eyebrow, and began running comparisons. No transponders pinged back from the human registry. No known beacons answered from the handful of alien neighbors humanity had managed to encounter. There was only mass, momentum, and a surface composition that its sensor fusion tagged as an unfamiliar alloy composite. As per its core programming, Argus relayed the data stream to Earthline's orbital coordination cluster and awaited a human's judgment. Far below, under a high blue sky that was just beginning to deepen into the hues of afternoon, Commander Declan Roden held a cooling cup of coffee and watched the anomaly plot bloom in his retinal overlay. He sat alone in a glass-fronted office that overlooked the ascent pad of Nairobi Spindleport's eastern elevator anchor. Below him, cargo containers slid along magnetic rails, their journey upward just beginning. He absorbed the numbers in silence, the way a man might read a familiar old language. Mass estimates, velocity, approach angle, atmospheric grazing risk. He frowned when the trajectory line intersected with the Atlas graveyard. Officially, the graveyard was designated Atlas Salvage Conglomerate Zone 12, a hollow sphere of orbit packed to the gills with derelicts, debris, and cannibalized frames. To most of Earth's nations, it was a junkyard, a monument to past failures and obsolescence. To Declan and his people, it was something more. It was insurance, a kinetic buffer, a source of makeshift raw materials, and increasingly, a shield. Argus, project the decay curve if unassisted, Declan thought, the command translated by his implant into a direct query for the AI. Unassisted decay will result in multi-pass atmospheric grazing and eventual breakup between 10 and 20 years, Argus's calm voice warmed his ear implant. Commander, however, collision probability with existing Atlas assets is rising. I recommend interception and controlled disposal. Declan mentally tapped the plot open wider, leaning back in his chair. The containers would skim along the graveyard's outer shell on their first pass. That meant they were someone else's trash, tossed carelessly into his front yard. He checked Argus's threat analysis. No weapon signatures. No active power, save for the faint internal heat generated by their own mass. Whoever had sent them had simply cut their engines and let gravity do the rest. Put it in the priority queue, he said, his voice a low murmur. And mark it for salvage review. There might be something worth picking over before we drop it into the burner. Argus acknowledged with a silent pulse of data. Declan shut off the overlay and took a sip of his coffee. It had gone tepid in the minutes he had spent evaluating the plots. He did not know then that the containers were full of children. He only knew that they were a problem, a piece of cosmic flotsam drifting toward his doorstep. Hours later, as the world turned and the first ripples of information about the anomaly began to filter through Earthline's vast hierarchy, an entirely different kind of mind took a keen interest. Erie Naven sat curled on the floor of her cluttered apartment in Tel Aviv, a chaotic nest of tripods and cables. Half a dozen screens formed a ragged semicircle in front of her, each one a window into a different stream of data or news. She wore compression shorts and a faded t-shirt, her dark hair twisted into a practical knot. Her eyes, sharp and focused, moved faster than her fingers as she swiped and tapped across the interfaces. Her channel analytics had been flat for days. Her last deep dive into the arcane world of lunar mining arbitration had done well with the niche crowd, but it had failed to capture the wider world's attention. She needed something sharp, something visceral, something that would cut through the digital noise. A friend in orbital coordination pinged her a private link with a single line of text. Somebody just dumped alien hazmat near Atlas. You did not hear it from me. Erie's heart gave a little thump. She opened the link and skimmed the raw feed. Argus's initial scans, the trajectory plots, the code phrase Argus had attached, unknown biohazard content possible. Hazmat. Atlas. Alien. The words ticked boxes in her head, lighting up a mental map of potential narratives. Environmental crime. Jurisdictional gray zones. All the messy, fertile ground she knew how to cultivate. She could already see the thumbnail for her next report. An anonymous container streaking toward Earth's scrap halo. The words, "They are using us as a dumpster." She started recording voice notes, pacing the small space as she spoke. Okay, so the hook is this. We find out someone tried to throw away a giant alien trash bag in our orbital backyard. No identification, no consent. We send a salvage crew because, of course, we do. And then she paused. Something inside her, a journalist's instinct honed by years of chasing stories, had learned to hesitate, to question the obvious. Because the stories that truly moved people, the ones that stuck with them and changed things, were not about inert metal or abstract threats. They were about whatever lay inside. Her thumbs danced across her interface, a blur of motion. Request embed privileges with upcoming salvage ops. Argus anomaly tag. Atlas graveyard jurisdiction. She hesitated for a moment, then added Declan Roden's name to the request. He had been the face of a previous crisis, a measured official with tired eyes and a voice that people seemed to trust. If he was involved, this might be bigger than just scrap. She sent the request and smiled to herself. If they said no, she knew 3 different Skyhands divers who owed her favors. One way or another, she planned to be on the scene when whatever this was intersected with human hands. In his office above Nairobi's rising steel and glass, Declan read the embed request and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He remembered Erie Naven clearly from a smaller disaster 3 years earlier, when a failing satellite had skimmed too close to a Centennial Festival station. She had embedded herself with his emergency crews and produced a blisteringly honest live stream that had both vilified and vindicated his people. She had made them heroes and scapegoats in equal measure, which was to say, she had told the truth. He trusted her to make things harder. He trusted her not to lie. With a sigh that was part resignation, part acceptance, he tapped approval. Argus, route Naven's embed through standard clearances and slot her on the first Skyhand shuttle to the anomaly. Also, give me a projected timeline on intercept. First container will reach Atlas proximal zone in approximately 6 hours, Commander, Argus replied. Skyhand's interception window opens in 3 hours. Start spinning up teams. In low Earth orbit, the rescue technicians of the Orbital Rescue Group Skyhands received the alerts and began going through their rehearsed motions. They donned pressure suits, checked tethers, reviewed decompression drills. Some cursed gently under their breath. Others hummed old songs to themselves. None of them, not even the most superstitious, suspected that the cargo they would soon crack open had once breathed warm air under alien skies. By the time the first Skyhand shuttle slipped away from its dock and burned gently outward toward the Atlas graveyard, the sun had slid toward evening over Nairobi. Shadows lengthened across the city, stretching like fingers. Declan watched the ascent tracks in his overlay, every engine plume a thread in a web he had been weaving his entire career. He had been an officer in wars, but this coordination of steel and flesh and timing, felt like his true battlefield. He was steering civilization through its own detritus. He had no inkling that someone else, somewhere far beyond his horizon, had looked at his world and seen nothing but a trash can. Far away, where stars burned smaller and sparser against the velvet black, a ship called VDS Casketfall tumbled on a corrected course, its drives cold and silent. Its captain, a heavy-jawed Vok in a uniform that smelled faintly of old ozone, had long since set the disposal protocol and turned away. The containers, long chains of composite shells with embedded life support and thermal regulation, had slid free of the ship's magnetic cradle like shed skin. They had coasted toward the pale blue dot that its NAVCOM marked as an unimportant world. No significant political alignment. No central authority recognized by the Imperium. Just a juvenile species, kicking at the edges of its own gravity well. The captain had not thought of the contents of those containers as lives. He had thought of them as liabilities. They were contaminated, the memos had said, not biologically, but cognitively. Their neural engrams held traces of restricted operations, unauthorized exposures, fragmentary glimpses of things that could not be risked. When the order had come to divert the cargo from Umbrasilix and find the nearest low-impact star system with sufficient mass for disposal, the captain had punched in the coordinates without a second thought. He had watched the blue dot on his screen grow fractionally larger, feeling nothing. He told himself the Imperium knew what it was doing. He told himself he was merely obeying a protocol designed by minds greater than his. By the time Argus saw the containers, Casketfall was already far away, its ghostly signature fading into the interstellar dark. The first clear visual came when the Skyhand's shuttle crested the outer reach of the Atlas graveyard. The graveyard was a drifting cathedral of wreckage. The halls of retired freighters turned slowly, their once proud names scorched and unreadable. Broken arms of failed stations reached for nothing. Around them, a haze of smaller debris glittered like metallic dust. Beyond it, stark against the black, floated a string of newcomers. Dark cylinders linked by angle-braced trusses, tumbling slowly as if indecisive about how to die. The Skyhand's pilot whistled softly. "Those are not ours." The team lead, a compact woman named Kaylin with grease permanently under her fingernails, even in 0G, squinted through her visor and felt a prickle run along her spine. They looked purposeful. No lopsided improvised repairs, no mismatched parts. A clear, sharp design language that said someone somewhere had stamped these out in a factory that had never heard of Atlas. Behind the team lead seat, strapped in with a slightly green expression, Erie Naven held her recording rig close to her chest and watched via her suit's external cams. The containers loomed, filling her field of view. Hazard glyphs curved along their sides, sharp, insectal strokes in a language no human had formally learned. Her overlay struggled to classify the icons and eventually gave up, rendering them simply as unknown. Her heart beat faster. Threat. Mystery. Skyhand Alpha to orbital control, Declan's voice said into the shuttle's cabin, calm and steady. Maintain vector. You are green to approach. Argus will assist with navigation. Remember, no contact with external surfaces outside of tools. Treat it as a live biohazard until Hava says otherwise. Copy, Kaylin replied. They were caught on camera. A small cluster of humans in white and silver suits drifting toward a black alien carcass. Tether lines snaking behind them. For now, only Argus, Declan, and a handful of controllers watched. Later, billions would see these images through Erie's lenses, replayed until they became myth. The Skyhand's team sealed the shuttle's airlock, cycled the vacuum, and pushed off toward the nearest container. It dwarfed them, massive and indifferent. Its hull was smooth and unbroken except for recessed panels near the ominous hazard glyphs. No visible seams or vents. Argus, I want a high-res surface scan, Kaylin murmured. Look for weak points, maintenance hatches, anything that looks like an access interface. Argus complied. Lines and grids flickered in her visor, mapping potential cut zones. One rectangle near the container's midpoint glowed faintly. There, Argus said. Likely service panel. Material thinner. Suggest anchor points at these coordinates. As the technicians clamped magnetic platforms to the hull and deployed compact cutters, Erie hung back just enough to keep a wide frame. She could feel the story coalescing, an invisible weight at her back. Her channel chat would be frothing right now if this were live. She imagined the comments. It's a weapon. It's a bomb. It's a coffin. Do not open it. She had no intention of streaming this raw. Not yet. But she recorded every second. The cutters bit into the panel. Shimmering gas vented softly like a sigh. Indicators across the Skyhand suits blinked amber, then settled back to green as Havadrien's medical team, watching from a quarantine module on a nearby station, confirmed the lack of immediate toxins. Declan watched their vitals from his command seat, his jaw set. A square of hull came free, drifting aside on its tether. Beneath it, dim blue lights winked in the darkness. Kalen swung a lamp into the hole. Rows of shapes stretched into the interior gloom. Rectangular pods stacked in racks, each perhaps 2 meters long. Each bore a small, fogged viewport. The nearest viewport gleamed back the harsh white of the lamp. For a heartbeat, it looked blank. Then a small hand pressed against the inside of the transparent panel. The fingers were thin, slightly too long, the skin faintly luminous. They splayed weakly, as if testing the barrier. The rescuer holding the lamp jolted. A cry caught in her throat. Erie's breath was knocked out of her. Her camera drone, sensing her shock, drifted for a moment before stabilizing. The hand slid down the inside of the viewport, leaving a faint smear of condensation. Behind it, a face swam into focus. A child's face. Eyes closed. Wires coiling from temples into the pod's walls. The face was not quite human, not quite anything Erie recognized, but the shape, the small jaw, the soft mouth, tripped a recognition that bypassed xenobiology entirely. "Commander," Kalen whispered, her voice trembling slightly. There are people in here. I think they are kids." Declan's hand tightened on the armrest of his chair until his knuckles went white. "Argus, confirm," he said, his voice flat. "Biosignature analysis indicates multiple life forms in cryogenic suspension," Argus replied. "Size and morphology consistent with juvenile individuals across several species profiles. Estimated count for this container alone exceeds 200. The number hit the room like a physical slap. In her shuttle, Erie felt horror fight with a rising, hot flush of anger. Someone had dropped this into their sky and not cared what became of it. On the pod's viewport, the child's hand slid down and away, slackening as whatever automatic sedation governed their cycles took hold again. "We are not leaving them here," Kalen said, more to herself than to anyone else. Declan heard her anyway. He closed his eyes for a second. He saw fragments, news feeds that would explode at the phrase children in alien containers. Politicians sharpening knives. Bureaucrats weaving delaying language. He saw the weight of 12,000 decisions pressing down on him. He opened his eyes and spoke. "Skyhand Alpha, secure that panel and begin anchoring procedures. You are authorized to tow that container to Atlas Quarantine 0 under full biohazard containment. I repeat, we are taking it in." There was a collective exhale across the system. Argus adjusted trajectories. Tugs altered course. The machine gears of rescue began to turn. In the darkness behind the pods, a timer ticked down toward thresholds no human had programmed. The first container took almost 4 hours to move. The Skyhand shuttle's engine strained as it nudged the massive object gently toward a designated slot in the Atlas graveyard, where a ring of modular quarantine platforms waited like the petals of a steel flower. Robotic arms extended, clamped on, and pulled the container into a cradle. Inside Earthline's crisis coordination room, the air felt thick, heavy with unspoken questions. Declan stood at the central table, flakes of projected data swirling above the holographic surface. Around him, representatives from health, security, ethics, and external affairs all talked at once. "Unknown biological contamination," a health officer insisted. "We cannot simply start opening these pods. That cargo is labeled as hazardous by a civilization that clearly knows more than we do. They dropped it in our orbit," the external affairs representative snapped back. "Without notice, without permission. That is an act in itself, and those labels might just be legal theater. Or cover for something worse," muttered the security delegate. Director Matteo Ulrich, gray-haired and precise, sat at the head of the table, his fingers steepled under his chin. His eyes moved between Declan and the data. "We have incomplete information," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We have potential threat vectors we cannot quantify. And we have, according to Argus, between 9,000 and 15,000 living juveniles in a deteriorating environment. He paused. Our first duty is to our own population. But our chosen identity as a species will be written by what we do here. Declan listened, his jaw set. He thought of the small hands sliding down the viewport. Hava's preliminary scans show no active pathogens in the atmospheres of the pod she has sampled, he said. The hazard markings could indicate anything. Improperly registered experiments. Illegal cloning. The aliens' own taboos. We can keep wringing our hands, or we can start pulling them out one batch at a time under maximum quarantine and try to keep them alive. Mateo's gaze sharpened. You are aware, Commander, that if we proceed and an unknown agent gets loose, the political cost may be the least of our worries. I am, Director, Declan replied. I am also aware that if we let kids die in those cans when we had a chance to do something, we will not be able to look ourselves in the mirror afterward, even if the mirror is on a dying planet. He surprised himself with the sharpness of his own words. It wasn't how he usually argued. It sounded more like something an activist like Nari Rumgun would say at a rally. In a sense, that was exactly the voice the moment needed. Mateo knew it. He had spent his life balancing cold equations against the stubborn, often irrational, decency of humanity. He had seen time and again that for all their talk of pragmatism, humans carried an odd, dangerous allergy to abandoning those who couldn't fight back. Authorized limited intervention, he said, finally. Hava gets access to a small number of pods in a secured module on the kindling. Full biocontainment. Remote manipulator use whenever possible. Tuvin Markel is on call for system integration. I want those alien life support systems understood yesterday. He looked around the table. And for now, this operation remains classified. Public announcement will be made when we have more information. Declan's shoulders eased a fraction. Understood. It was already too late to keep it quiet. In orbit, Erie's footage existed, decrypted and backed up on local storage. On the shuttle ride back from the container, she had sat very still, her helmet in her lap, reviewing the moment the hand hit the viewport again and again, imprinting it into her mind. Her instinct as a storyteller whispered, "This is the image. This is the heart of it." Her instinct as a human whispered something simpler. Help them. When they docked with the kindling's broad white flank, Adrian was waiting. Hava was tall and hollow-eyed, her hair scraped back into a severe knot, her medical badges flashing a soft blue in the station's light. She looked over the Skyhands team, scanning for breaches or tremors, then focused on Erie. You got what you came for? She asked, one eyebrow arched. Yes, Erie said, then added. Not enough. I will not stop you from working, I promise. But people deserve to see this. Hava's mouth tightened. I am more concerned with whether the people in those pods get to see anything else ever, she said. You can film, but if you get in my way, I will sedate you and call it a precaution. Erie believed her. The quarantine module aboard the kindling had been hastily expanded. Transparent walls separated inner clean zones from monitoring corridors. Robotic arms sprouted from ceiling tracks like the limbs of careful insects. The first pod to be moved inside belonged to the child whose hand they had seen. Hava stood at a console, her gloved hands resting lightly on controls as the pod settled into a cradle. Monitors flared to life, translating alien readings into approximations human medics could read. Heart rate slow but present, one of Hava's assistants murmured. Respiration artificially suppressed. Core temperature low but within cryonorms. Neural activity? Hava asked. Patterned. Not typical sleep architecture. It is like they are idling. Hava thought of engines on standby. Let us wake her, she said. Erie watched through the glass, her camera drone perched above her shoulder. The pod systems responded to Hava's probes with a disconcerting smoothness. Alien glyphs flickered and rearranged themselves as they sensed a foreign operator, then grudgingly handed over manual override fields. Behind Hava, a new figure entered the module's outer ring. Tuvin Markel, his hair disheveled from having clearly been dragged from his bunk in a hurry. He carried a tablet stuffed with hastily decoded alien interface fragments. "I have got partial translations," he said without preamble. "These symbols here and here are repeated on outer hall markings. Closest match to anything I can parse is hazardous bioasset and containment integrity." Hava's jaw flexed. "Comforting. And these," Tuvin went on, pointing at a cluster of glyphs near the pod's head, "are timers. Multiple, layered. They are counting down in cycles I do not entirely understand. Best guess, maintenance intervals, maybe sedation renewal. Anything that looks like a kill switch?" Hava asked. "Not obvious in this unit, but I would bet my station rations there is a container-wide cascade protocol somewhere in the chain." "That is a conversation for later," Hava said. "Right now, I have one patient and a series of ticking clocks." She tapped a control. Within the pod, microthreads of light crawled along embedded channels. The child's chest rose fractionally, then more. Her fingers twitched. The pod's lid unsealed with a hiss. Cool air flowed into the module, instantly swept into filters. Monitors updated in a blur. The child's eyes fluttered. They were large, more reflective than human, with irises that seemed to catch the ceiling lights and break them into a faint halo. For a moment, they stared at nothing, at brightness, at unfamiliar shapes. Then they locked on Hava, standing in front of the transparent barrier. The child's pupils widened. She made a soft, questioning sound. Hava, who had spent years preparing herself to meet alien anatomies with calm objectivity, felt something twist unprofessionally in her chest. This was not a data point. This was a person. She spoke slowly, knowing there was almost no chance the child understood her words, but hoping some reassurance carried in her voice. "You are safe," she said. "We have got you." The girl's gaze darted around. Tubes pulled at her limbs as she shifted. Then she sagged, overwhelmed by fatigue and whatever sedative still chugged through her system. Hava's team moved in with practiced speed, stabilizing her, adjusting oxygen levels, running gentle scans. Erie found her hands had tightened on the camera rig, her knuckles white. She forced them to loosen. She had to keep recording. She had to show this. The child's eyes, the fragility, the care. The footage would speak more loudly than any monologue she could write. As Hava worked, Declan watched the metrics from the command center and knew this was only the first. Argus updated its counts as additional containers were intercepted and tractor-locked. Each was a grim parade of pods. Some contained beings similar to the first girl, clearly Aravi. Others held small, elongated silhouettes unlike anything human doctors had ever treated. Some pods, heartbreakingly, held normal human children, freckles, hair, the subtle sag of a belly. Current best estimate, Argus reported into the coordination room. Total pods across all containers between 11 and 13,000. Vital signs present in approximately 90%. Declan heard the number and felt something inside him tilt. He knew humanity's history well enough to understand that a species measured itself not by the atrocities it committed. Every intelligent thing committed atrocities, given time and power. It measured itself by how it responded when it stumbled across someone else's. He turned toward the wall where a muted global newsfeed played endless loops of weather and politics. They did not know yet. "We will begin triage prioritization," he said to Argus. "Oldest containers first. Pods with borderline life support readings at the top. Route that to Hava and Tuvin." Argus complied. The rescue of the first child went well. The rescue of the next dozen went less well. Their bodies had endured variances in cryocycles, microleaks, and the indifferent calculations of alien logistics. Some simply never woke. Hava's team worked beyond exhaustion, patching whatever they could, fighting unfamiliar physiology and failing technology. Each loss cut deeper because each success made it clear these were not abstractions. Erie's footage captured Hava in those moments, too. Standing over a pod whose occupants' readings had gone flat. her expression set in a mask that did nothing to hide the tremor in her hands. Viewers would later watch that and see not just heroism, but the cost of it. The more pods they opened, the more patterns Hava and Tuvin began to see. Many of the children, regardless of species, bore the same small implants at the base of the skull, threaded into neural tissue with exquisite care. Their brain wave signatures, even in sleep, showed anomalies, duplicate rhythms, ghost patterns that did not match their expected developmental stage. When Hava ran comparative scans, she saw faint scars and overwritten traces. It was as if someone had dipped a brush into their memories, painting over some, leaving others. These are not just victims of transport neglect, Hava said to Tuvin, her voice low. Somebody did things to them before they were loaded. And not in a hurry. They switched on and off pieces of who they are, Tuvin said. Like rewiring black boxes. Black boxes for what? Erie asked from the corner of the room where she had been quietly present so long that everyone had stopped censoring themselves around her. Hava looked at her. For something someone wanted to forget, she said. On Earth, outside insulated conference rooms and clean rooms, the first rumors began to leak. A salvage tech shaken by what he had seen in the quarantine module messaged a cousin. A nurse posted an anonymous thread about alien kids in orbit. A fragment of Erie's early footage, just 3 seconds of a small, pale hand on a viewport, escaped into the wild. Within hours, the image had been remixed, captioned, and bounced around the planet. On streets and in subways, on mountain villages connected by solar-powered comms, and undersea habitats and orbital lounges, humans saw that hand and felt the same jolt. Nari Ramgun, standing on a makeshift stage in a crowded plaza in Mumbai, saw it on a supporter's tablet and understood in a flash that whatever campaign she had been running about asteroid workers' rights had just been eclipsed by something bigger. She held the tablet up to the crowd. This, she said, her voice booming through the speakers. This is what they found in our sky. The plaza murmured, then roared. Nari did not yet know how many children there were, what had been done to them, or who had sent them. She knew only that in that moment, across countless networks, a collective sense of outrage and protectiveness flickered to life. Governments felt it like a wind shift. Within Earthline, director Matteo Ulrich read the first unauthorized posts about space kids and swore quietly. His carefully constructed timeline for managed disclosure had been shattered by the messy reality of human mouths and fingers. He called Declan. We are losing control of the narrative, he said. We never had it, Declan answered. We just had a head start. Now we have to make sure the narrative is true. What if the truth is that we brought a plague home? Matteo asked. Declan thought of Hava's scans, Tuvin's analysis, the lack of clear pathogenic vectors. The evidence so far says the only infection we have brought home is someone else's cruelty, he said. With respect, sir, if we try to bury that, we become complicit in it. Matteo stared at his own reflection in the dark screen of his desk for a long moment after the call ended. He thought of his grandchildren. He thought of humanity's precarious position on the galactic stage, neither entirely primitive nor truly integrated. A young species, crouched between the legs of giants, still choosing its alliances. He sighed and started drafting a public address. By the time he stepped in front of the cameras in the Earthline press chamber, the rumor had grown teeth. People had already imagined 1,000 worst-case scenarios. In that sense, the truth, for once, was both worse and better than speculation. 7 hours ago, he began, after identifying himself. Elements of our orbital rescue services intercepted alien origin cargo near the Atlas salvage field. We have determined that these containers hold a large number of children from multiple species. These children are alive. They are under our protection. The words protection and children hit like two notes in a chord. Around the world, people leaned closer. On the Kindling, in Harbor Light's control pods, and sky stations, crew and techs paused to listen. Matteo outlined in careful language the unknowns, the potential risks, the refusal of whoever had jettisoned the cargo to identify themselves. Then he said clearly, we will not abandon these children. We will act with caution, but we will act with compassion. We invite any civilization who believes themselves responsible for them to come forward and explain how they justified putting them into cold boxes and throwing them into the dark. It was a provocation as much as an invitation. In some offices far away, it was heard as such. On a small listening outpost in the Oort cloud called Cinder Station, a duty officer watched a series of spikes appear in their intercepted beam analysis. "Got something, sir?" she said to her superior. "Burst from what looks like Vox space. High priority, multiple hops, keywords." She squinted at the autodecoder. Containment. Contamination. Umbra neutralization. And something about lost cargo. Her superior tilted his head. "Tag it, encrypt it, and send it down the pipe," he said. "This smells like it belongs to the kids." On the kindling, as more pods were loaded and more small faces seen, one in particular drew attention. Her pod had been flagged by Tuvin's algorithms as high risk, life support margins thin, countdown timers nearly at zero. She was human, according to Argus's preliminary bioscan, with vitals flickering uncertainly. "Bring that one in next," Hava ordered. The child emerged into the quarantine module's light, gasping, fingers clawing weakly at the air. Her hair clung in damp strands to her forehead. She was perhaps 10, maybe 11. She thrashed as the pod opened, disoriented and panicking. Hava had to use the outer restraint field to prevent her from tearing lines out of her own arms. "Easy," Hava said, her voice steady. "You are okay. You are not where you were. You are safe." The girl's eyes focused. Wild, she spoke, not in the crisp consonants of Earth's languages, but in a lilting, fractured dialect from a frontier outpost barely in the human consortia. The kindling's translation suite, already humming with Aravi and other samples, struggled. After a few seconds, it started spitting out soft approximations. "Schoolyard," the girl was saying. "They said we were chosen, that it would be fun. There were lights, then cold." Her voice broke. She looked past Hava through the glass and saw Erie, who had involuntarily stepped closer. Something in the reporter's face, a familiarity of species perhaps, clicked. "Where am I?" the girl asked, the translation smoothing the panic into shivers of sound. "Is this another trick?" "You are on a human ship," Erie said, surprising herself. Hava glanced at her, but said nothing. "My name is Erie. You are not alone." The girl's shoulders shook. Tears floated in globules away from her cheekbones, caught and wicked away by the field. Her name, they learned slowly, was Lena Corvo. She had been taken from a mining habitat school, promised a test for special opportunities. She remembered a shuttle, a sterile facility, voices speaking in a human language twisted by foreign mouths, then in harsher tongues she did not know. She remembered rows of other children, wires, fear. And then, as she tried to remember more, the memory itself seemed to skitter sideways, like a frightened animal avoiding a trap in her own mind. Alina Vost, watching the session from Earth via a secure feed, leaned closer. "There is something blocking her from going further," she said into the conference link. "It is not just trauma. It is structured. Someone has put fences in her memories." Archivist Faravi, their Aravi counterpart, nodded slowly. Their tendrils shifted in a pattern that in their culture signified deep unease. "We have felt this before," they said softly. "And those who came back from the Imperium's re-education centers, there are scars behind the scars." The pieces began to fall together. Solari Dross's message arrived like a stone dropped into a pond already full of ripples. It came in on a narrowband frequency, encrypted with a key that matched fragments found in the alien code Tuvin had been unpacking. "I am Solari Drossin," the message said in awkwardly synthesized trade cant. "Former logistics analyst for Helios Axis under VOC contract. I know what is in your orbit. I can explain why they were disposed of. You have something I cannot carry alone. I seek sanctuary in exchange for testimony." Matteo played the message 3 times, listening to the strained urgency in the alien's voice. He convened Declan, Hava, Tuvin, Alina, and a handful of advisors. If this is a trap, one security officer said, inviting them to meet us at a humanitarian hub is insanity. If it is genuine, Alina countered, and we ignore it, we will be stumbling around in the dark while an empire makes decisions about us. We need every scrap of context we can get. Declan thought about vectors and triangulation. A single data point, a string of containers, an unknown origin told you very little. A second, the intercept of Vok traffic about missing contaminated cargo, gave you a line. A third, an insider with names and motives could give you a plane. We cannot afford to let fear paralyze us, he said. We choose the ground. We choose the terms. Harbor Light was built for emergency relief. It can be hardened. It is also away from the surface. Mateo watched him and wondered when the cautious commander had become such an advocate for risk. He already knew the answer. Somewhere between watching a small hand on a viewport and hearing Lena's halting description of being chosen. Very well, Mateo said. We invite Solari to Harbor Light. We relocate a portion of the children there, as much for space as for symbolism, and we tighten defensive protocols around the station. Harbor Light had never expected to be the center of anything. Range Refuge Hub, Harbor Light was designed as a way station, a place where disaster refugees could be triaged, resupplied, and redirected. It had docking arms, modular domes, a modest mid-bay. It was the kind of place that only specialists knew by name. Within days, it became something else. Transport barges and shuttles arrived from the kindling and other quarantine platforms, bearing pods and, later, ambulatory children. Volunteers came up from Earth via Nairobi Spindleport and other launch sites. Doctors, teachers, social workers, cooks. Devia Corn arrived with barely a bag, already drafting intake procedures and long-term care frameworks in her head. She walked the unfinished corridors of Harbor Light, listening to the sounds of frightened children in different languages echoing down metal walls, and rearranged everything. These ones need quiet. These ones respond to music. These ones need constant tactile reassurance. She assigned human volunteers to non-human children based on personality, not just physiology. A burly asteroid mechanic with a gentle touch ended up as the primary contact for a cluster of delicate Aravi kids. A retired teacher with a loud laugh was paired with silent, wide-eyed hybrids who only relaxed when someone's presence filled the space with confident warmth. Narai's activist network turned their outrage into logistics. They organized donation drives, not just for physical goods but for attention and political support. On Earth, marches wound through capitals with banners reading, "No child left to die in orbit." On Harbor Light, Alina Vost set up a neurotherapy suite in a former cargo bay. Sensors lined the ceiling. Chairs and cushions filled the floor. Kids sat plucking at tactile toys while Alina and Faravi took gentle readings, mapping the invisible scars in their minds. Lena Corvo became one of Alina's regulars. Alina found her astonishingly resilient. Lena woke from nightmares with shaking limbs and damp hair, then insisted on joining group activities. She asked questions that adults had trouble answering. Why did they want us? Why did not anyone stop them before? In therapy sessions, with her consent and the help of Faravi's careful touch, Lena revisited the edges of her abduction. She saw the schoolyard again, the strangers with their bright smiles and precisely worded offers. She saw the shuttle's interior, the way the walls seemed to hum with tension. She felt the prick of a needle, the sinking cold. Every time she approached the memory of the facility beyond, she hit a strange inner wall. Her heart would race, her palms would sweat, and her thoughts would slide away, skittering into safer crevices. It is like there is fog in my head, Lena said one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on a cushion, fingers knotting a piece of string. If I walk toward some parts, the fog gets thicker. If I push, I feel sick. Alina nodded, watching her monitors. That fog was put there deliberately, she said. Your mind is doing exactly what it should, protecting you until we can move carefully. You are not failing. Someone else failed you. We are going to fix that as much as we can. Lena looked at her with an expression that was too old for her years. Will it ever go away? she asked. Maybe not completely, Alina admitted. But it will change. It will become something you can live with instead of something that runs your life from a shadow. And in the process, if you choose, you can help us understand what they did to you and the others, so we can stop them from doing it again. Lena hesitated, then nodded slowly. Then I want to remember, she said. Even if it hurts. Far outside, in cold space, Solari Drawson's small shuttle crept toward Harbor Light under a transponder that flickered between recognized and unknown. They were tired down to the bone. Their species, long used to bending under the Imperium's weight, had almost forgotten what resistance felt like. They had helped coordinate cargo loads for Helios Axis for longer than human civilization had had spaceflight. They had seen numbers and codes where others saw faces. It had always been easy to tell themselves they were just pushing symbols around. Then the cargo lists had changed. The manifests had begun using euphemisms that even their jaded heart could not swallow. Contaminated juveniles. Hazardous engrams. Cognitive waste. Solari had overridden access restrictions, read deeper, and seen glimpses of Umbrasilex's work. Children wired to machines, their experiences siphoned and overwritten. Their fear turned into graphs. The knowledge had poisoned them. Now, as Harbor Light's docking clamps closed around their shuttle, as security staff in neutral gray suits and varied physiologies waited on the other side of the airlock, Solari wondered if they had traded one kind of death for another. The airlock cycled. Gravity rose gently as the internal ring spin pressed down. A human man stepped forward, medium height, hair going to silver at the temples, wearing the Earthline Directorate's emblem on his chest. Beside him stood Declan, his posture half military, half exhausted civic official. Behind them, Erie's camera drone hovered, its red recording light winking. Solari straightened their shoulders. I am Solari Drawson, they said aloud for the first time in a place not owned by Helios Axis. I have come to tell you why someone thought 12,000 children belonged in a disposal chute. The words hung in the air, heavy. Mateo extended a hand, hesitated, then converted it into a more species-neutral gesture of welcome. We are listening, he said. They took Solari to a secure conference room with transparent walls overlooking one of Harbor Light's playdomes. Through it, the alien watched a human volunteer attempt to teach a group of Aravi children how to throw a ball in microgravity. The ball bounced, floated, was caught by a child whose skin gleamed faintly in the station's light. Solari's throat constricted. They should not be here, they said softly. They should never have been anywhere near what was done to them, Alina agreed from a corner. Solari began to talk. They explained the Vok Imperium's obsession with control of populations, narratives, even memories. They described the black projects that Helios Axis had serviced in exchange for lucrative contracts, programs in which abducted children from subordinate species and unaligned worlds were used as living recorders. You call them black boxes, they said, gesturing vaguely at Erie, who had used that phrase in one of her speculative streams. To the Imperium, they are black mirrors. They hold up truth to those who would rather not see, so they must be clouded. Umbrasilex was one of several facilities where this clouding took place. Solari described sterile halls, procedural logs that spoke of neural overwrite cycles, failure rates, and waste disposal. They spoke of shipments diverted, of internal politics that had delayed one particular shipment, the one that ended up drifting toward Earth. When that cargo was designated contaminated, Solari said, it did not mean diseased. It meant that the attempts to overwrite memories had failed in ways the Imperium considered too risky. The children had seen too much. Their minds had resisted. There was disagreement among our superiors about what to do. They looked down at their hands. In the end, someone made a simple decision. Put them in sealed containers. Find a world that does not matter politically. Dump them into its gravity well. And let time and entropy finish the work. Cheaper than building new eraser suites. Denser than space. Less formal than liquidation. And that world was ours, Declan said quietly. Your system fit the criteria, Solari replied. Peripheral, emerging, unaligned. A place where no one important would look closely if anything seeped. Silence spread through the room. Tuvin's mind ticked through implications. If the contamination is knowledge, he said slowly, then the hazard markings on those containers are warnings not about disease, but about truth. Precisely, Solari said. Truth can spread. It can infect. It can change loyalties. The Imperium is more afraid of loose truth than of any plague. Matteo's stomach turned. He had spent his life dealing with truths that people found inconvenient. But this was weaponized forgetting. Alina's monitors back on Earth hummed softly with the weight of it. She saw for a moment the children's hidden scars, not just as injuries, but as stolen testimonies. If we can restore those memories, she said. We are not just helping them heal, Alina said, her voice low and intense. We are producing evidence of crimes on a scale most of our species has never had to understand. And painting a very large target on ourselves, Solari added, their tone heavy with grim certainty. The Imperium will not tolerate loose ends. The words hung in the air, a stark counterpoint to the sounds of children playing just beyond the transparent wall. Matteo Ulrich looked from Solari's weary face to the determined set of Alina's jaw. He understood. The moment they granted asylum, they had inherited the enemy. The moment they chose to listen, they had accepted the burden of proof. News of Solari's revelations did not stay in that room for long. Erie, with her producer's instinct for narrative momentum, worked with Matteo and Envoy Pallone, the Turthus representative who had arrived with a dignified curiosity, to construct a broadcast that could be released without exposing operational details. She stripped out coordinates, tactical specifics, and anything that could make vulnerable individuals identifiable. What she left was brutal enough. The exposé she assembled threaded together three powerful strands. The first was the initial mystery, the image of the silent, alien containers drifting into Earth's orbit, the hand on the viewport. The second was the human cost, the testimonies of children like Lena, who had consented to speak on record, their halting words describing promises of special tests and the sudden, terrifying cold. The third was the cold, procedural truth, Solari's testimony, intercut with translated logs from Umbrasilics that spoke in chillingly bland terms of erase cycle failures, asset disposal, and cognitive contamination indices. She timed the release to coincide with Matteo's formal declaration that Earthline had granted asylum to all rescued children. Anyone who objects, Matteo said into the camera, his face a mask of resolve, may come and make their case before the children themselves, and before every other civilization that wishes to listen. It was a challenge flung at the heart of the galaxy. Far away, the Valkith Imperium listened grudgingly. They had known from scrambled reports that something had gone wrong with the disposal of a particular contaminated cargo. They had not expected the juveniles to be alive, speaking, and under the protection of a species whose moral streak was beginning to outshine its technological modesty. Their first response was not a fleet. It was a message, a communiqué that came through a standard diplomatic channel cloaked in icy politeness. Your world has unknowingly taken custody of bioassets compromised by cognitive pathogens, it read. For your own safety and for that of the wider community, you are instructed to transfer custody of all contaminated juveniles to VOC quarantine teams at once. Failure to comply will be treated as willful proliferation of a dangerous agent. Matteo read it aloud in a meeting on Harbor Light, his voice carefully neutral. Jost Trin, the admiral who had been pulled into the inner circle, listened, his hands folded. The word pathogen is doing a lot of work there, he muttered. It is a lie, Solari said flatly. But a convenient one. They will find ears willing to hear it. What happens if we refuse? Narai Rungan asked, her arms crossed. Solari made a small gesture with one hand, a shrug in their people's vocabulary. They will come, they said. They were right. Reports from Cindereer and other listening posts sketched the gathering of a formation on the edges of known space. VOC cruisers, lean and scaled with armor, accompanied by Helios Axis support craft. Their stated purpose in internal communications was containment of a compromised system. Jose watched the vector plot on the main screen, a cluster of red icons spinning toward humanity's fragile ball of blue and green and cloud. We cannot meet that head-on, he said, first to himself and then to anyone who would listen. If we line ships up bow to bow, we will lose. We do not have the hardware and we do not have the experience. What do we have? Declan asked. Jose thought of Atlas, of Argus, of the junk and improvisation that had gotten humans this far. We have a sky full of trash and minds that know how to move it, he said. We have AIs that can breathe in too much data and exhale patterns. We have a species that turns kitchens into command centers if you give them a crisis and a cause. We have 12,000 kids people are suddenly willing to do anything for. Narai added. The plan that evolved in the days that followed was not elegant. It was, in some ways, very human. Argus mapped the Atlas graveyard in obsessive detail, identifying hulks that could be nudged into new orbits without collapsing the whole mess. Tugs repositioned derelicts, turning the graveyard into a churning belt of potential cover and obstacles. Civilian manufacturers repurposed assembly lines, churning out small drones by the thousands. The drones were simple, little more than a microdrive, a processor, and an emission package. In Argus's hands, they would become a swirling aurora of false signatures and localized interference. Tuvin, sitting in a cramped workstation piled with empty nutrient wrappers, turned his talents outward. With Solari's help, he burrowed into Helios Axis's logistics network, exploiting the same complacent interconnectedness that had made their empire-spanning operations efficient. He inserted glitches, conflicting orders, maintenance recalls. The aim was not to stop the Vok formation. That was impossible. It was to fray its edges, to make its support vessels trip over themselves just enough to matter. On Harbor Light, life went on under the hum of impending battle. Children learned to read human letters and tercid glyphs in the same day. They decorated the walls of their dorms with drawings that mixed old worlds and new. Some drew ships like the ones that had taken them. Others drew Harbor Light's domes seen from the outside, floating in black. Lena watched drills play out in the station's corridors. Volunteers herded children into shelters, timing themselves. Skyhand's teams practiced sealing hull breaches with foam and flexible armor patches. Alina, sensing Lena's growing anxiety, offered to move their sessions to a quieter corner. No, Lena said. I want to see. They are coming for us, right? Yes, Alina said, because lying would only make the truth worse later. But we are not easy to take. Lena remembered in flashes now the way Imperium officers had spoken about her and the others as if they were packages. She remembered overhearing one say in accented human trade cant, if they leak, it will be messy. What if we leak on them instead? She said, half to herself. Alina smiled thinly. That I think is the plan. The day the Vok ships dropped into local space, it was morning over Nairobi and late evening over Harbor Light's portion of its orbit. Time zones became meaningless. Everyone synced to Argus's countdown. At 8:15 a.m. Earth Standard, Argus sang into the network. Vok Helios formation entering outer perimeter. Vector confirmed toward Earth-Moon plane. Initiating Phase 1. From his command chair on a hardened platform above Earth's primary control center, Jose watched their signatures bloom on his display. Gravitational anomalies, radiation spikes, drive plumes. They are bigger than us, one junior officer whispered. A useless observation, but an honest one. They are not hungrier, Jose replied. Remember that. In Harbor Light's central dome, children were hustled into shelters. Lena found herself pressed between an Aravi girl with luminous skin and a human boy who still flinched at loud noises. Is this like when they took you? The boy asked Lena, his eyes wide. No, Lena said firmly. This time we have people. He nodded, his fist curled tight around a small toy someone had given him. Up in space, the Vok formation approached cautiously at first. Long-range sensors sniffed at the Atlas graveyard. They saw the hulks, the debris, the swirling noise of microdrones Argus had already begun to release. Within their ships, commanders frowned at the cluttered tactical plots. "This system is disorderly," one remarked. "This system is improvisational," another corrected. On Earthline's side, Argus poured its awareness into the melee. It assigned drones to emit signatures, mimicking larger ships, flickering them in and out of existence at the edge of detection. It sent others to shadow Vok vessels at a distance, mapping how their sensor suites reacted, learning and adjusting. Within the graveyard, tugs pushed and nudged hulks into final positions. It was like setting up a field of bowling pins and then watching as someone tried to run through without knocking any over. Phase 2, Joe said as the first Vok destroyer nosed into the graveyard's outskirts. Harbor Light, lockdown. Atlas drift pattern gamma. Declan watched Harbor Light's icon change color on his display, indicating sealed bulkheads, activated internal shields, and redirected power. He imagined the people inside. Hava in her mid-bay. Alina monitoring neural feeds. Devia calming frightened children. Iri talking quietly to her camera, narrating history. He felt absurdly like a father buckling a reckless child into a car seat before a dangerous drive. The first shots were not meant to hit anything. Vok gunners fired controlled beams and packets into the graveyard, testing density, watching how Rex shifted. They picked off a few drones by chance, their explosions flickering like distant fireflies. Then a Vok destroyer, more confident, pushed deeper toward the cleared corridor that led eventually to Harbor Light's orbit. Argus had anticipated this. It had seeded that corridor with dormant microdrones, each programmed to wake at a precise threshold. As the destroyer crossed it, the drones kicked on, unleashing a storm of electromagnetic static. Vok sensor feeds filled with ghosts. False signatures blossomed and died in randomized patterns. The destroyer slowed, uncertain. Its escort ships adjusted, trying to compensate. In doing so, they bumped up against hulks Argus had gently nudged into their paths, forcing awkward burns and, in one case, a near collision that threw another vessel off course entirely. On a Helios Axis support craft, systems began to glitch. Tuvin's malware, long embedded, chose this moment to trigger a series of false alarms. Maintenance consoles screamed about imaginary coolant leaks. Navigation arrays rebooted. Fuel valves refused to open until non-existent inspections were logged. Vok commanders swore in languages no human had heard. "This is not random," one spat. "Someone is inside our systems." Then crushed them from the outside, another snarled. They concentrated their force. Several ships, struggling through the graveyard's arranged chaos, finally emerged into relatively clear lines of fire toward Harbor Light. Inside Harbor Light's control room, an alarm shrieked. "Enemy vessels on direct vector," a controller said, her voice clipped. "Charging weapons. Time to impact at current range, if they commit, approximately 12 minutes. Declan's heart pounded. 12 minutes felt like both an eternity and no time at all. "Jose," he said over the link. "We are at that cliff." "Phase 3, Jose replied. His hand hovered over a control, then pressed. Around Harbor Light, formerly inert cargo containers lit up. Skyhands had spent long nights repurposing them into kinetic barriers, attaching tethers that ran back to anchoring hulks in the Atlas field. Now thrusters belched fire as the containers swung into place, forming a crude, shifting shell. It was not an impenetrable shield. It was a wall that moved and flexed. A boxer's raised arms rather than a castle's granite. The first volley came like a sunrise. Beams lanced out from Vok guns, bright and terrible. They hit the moving barrier, chewing through containers and sending fragments spinning. Some pieces glanced off Harbor Light's outer plates, scoring long scars, but not penetrating. Inside the station, the impact sounded like distant thunder. Children flinched. A few screamed. In one shelter, Lena gripped the boy's hand so tightly his knuckles went pale. "They did not hit us," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "They hit the junk. We are not junk." In the mid-bay, Hava felt the vibrations under her boots and checked the readouts on her suspended patients. Their pods were shock-mounted. The children inside slept through the storm. Status, she snapped. Structural integrity holding, an engineer replied over the station net. We have lost some external modules, but the core is fine. Keep it that way, Hava said. On the human side, no one ordered counterfire with lethal intent. They had no planet-cracking weapons, no fleets of warships. Their offense, such as it was, lay in forcing the Vok to waste their shots and in eroding their willingness to shoot. That erosion required witnesses. Erie stood. In Harbor Light's central dome, her camera drone hovering near her shoulder, watching the streaks of light through the station's transparent ribs. She spoke with a calm she did not fully feel. Out there, she said into her mic, are ships built by an empire that thinks children who remember its crimes are biohazards. And here are those same children, and the people who refuse to let them die quietly. You are watching this because someone thought dumping them in our sky would be easier than facing what they did. She gestured slightly toward the bulkhead behind which Lena and others sheltered. We are not firing back with the same weapons. We are firing with attention, with evidence. Her feed, split-screened by prearranged plan with clips from Umbrasilex's logs, clinical descriptions of erase cycle failures, of asset disposal, of cognitive contamination indices, hit viewers like a hammer. The visual juxtaposition of cold text beside the warm, chaotic life of Harbor Light under threat was devastating. In a shelter, Lena watched the same feed on a wall display. Her own earlier interview from the kindling played briefly, her small face, eyes tight, saying, "They said we were chosen." She saw herself, then saw the ship lights outside. She stood up. "Where are you going?" the boy asked, gripping her sleeve. "To say something," Lena said. She found her way with surprising ease through the warren of corridors to the dome where Erie was filming. Security personnel moved aside when they recognized her. This too was part of the new reality. The children were not cargo. They were voices. Erie saw her approach and, after a flicker of surprise, stepped slightly aside, her microphone still live. Lena stood in front of the camera drone, breathing hard. She did not have a speech prepared. She had only a burning knot in her chest and the image of ships outside trying to burn the place that had caught her when no one else had. "You are watching this," she said, without greeting. "So you are probably not on those ships. But maybe someone who is can see it. Maybe it gets through." She tilted her head as if speaking to an invisible audience just beyond the dome. "You came and took us from our homes," she said. "You put us in places that hurt. You tried to make us forget things even you did not want to remember. Then when that did not work, you put us in boxes and threw us away." Her voice shook, but she did not stop. "You call us contaminated. You say we are dangerous because of what we remember. Maybe we are. Maybe the truth is a disease for people who do what you do. I hope it spreads." She glanced sideways at Erie. "You thought our world was small and unimportant," she went on. "You thought no one here would open those boxes. You were wrong." Outside, on Vok bridges, officers who had never seen a human child except as an abstract statistic saw Lena's face in overlays hacked into their feeds by sympathetic factions or leaky information flows. Some looked away, others frowned. A few felt the first prickles of doubt they had ever allowed themselves. The Vok commander of the lead cruiser narrowed his eyes. "Cut that transmission," he ordered. "We can suppress it locally," his comms officer said, "but it is echoing out through Tercid and other relays. The containment is already compromised." He bared his teeth in a grimace that would have looked like a smile to a human. "Then we end this tangibly," he said. "Target their hub. Disrupt their spine. If we cannot erase their words, we can destroy the symbol that gives them weight." Sensor data flickered. Trajectories recalculated. Main batteries aligning on Harbor Light. Argus reported into Jose's ear. Projected fire pattern concentrated. Time to high-energy discharge, approximately 3 minutes. Jose's pulse hammered. They had known this moment would come. They had one card left to play that might prevent Harbor Light from being gutted. "Declan," he said, tell your people to brace. Phase 4. Atlas Swing. Across the graveyard, tethers went taut. For days, Skyhand's teams and tugs had quietly attached cables to selected hulks, threading them through pulleys anchored to distant masses. The arrangement had looked like so much spider silk in the void. Now, at Argus's signal, compact thrusters fired en masse. The hulks moved. They swung out of their previous lazy drifts into new arcs, intersecting the lines of fire Argus had projected from the Vox. It was not perfect. Space was too big, light too fast. But it was enough to force the Imperium gunners into split-second recalibrations. Some of their shots burned through smaller hulks and continued, attenuated, toward Harbor Light. Others splashed entirely against derelict armor, sending fountains of molten metal spinning. One beam, dead on target, met a massive freighter carcass that had once hauled ice from the outer moons. The beam dug in, flared, and blew the freighter apart. Fragments slammed into companion hulks, setting off a cascade. For a sickening heartbeat, Joes thought they had miscalculated disastrously, and that the debris would carve straight through Harbor Light. Argus intervened, micro-adjusting thrusters on the hulks still under its control, yawing them just enough to redirect the worst of the shrapnel. Pieces still rained toward the station, but at glancing angles. Alarms howled. Automatic shutters slammed over some of Harbor Light's ribs, turning transparent views to opaque safety. Inside, lights flickered. People ducked reflexively as the structure shuddered. A section of the outer habitation ring decompressed, its alarms merging with the general cacophony. "We have lost Searing external habitat," a voice shouted in Harbor Light's control room. "Any casualties?" Declan demanded. "None. We evaluated that section earlier." He exhaled. "Hold," he said. "Just hold." Outside, Vox ships rocked under the backwash of their own misaimed fury. One cruiser took a chunk of Atlas shrapnel square across its sensor cluster, sending its main array dark. Another found its coolant systems overtaxed by the sustained firing. Safeties tripped, forcing a pause. In that pause, a new set of signatures entered the field. Tercid patrol craft, sleek and angular, slid into flanking positions. They held weapons cold, but their mere presence introduced a new variable. From Harbor Light, Envoy Paloon's voice cut across shared channels. "Imperium vessels," Paloon said, each word crisp. "You are recorded firing on a recognized humanitarian hub whose occupants include children abducted under your authority and sold into illegal programs. You are recorded refusing offers to address these charges in open tribunal. If you continue, you will not only be wrong, you will be alone." It was not entirely true. The Imperium would always have some allies, some vassals too afraid or invested to break away. But in that moment, with their ships already bleeding efficiency, with their narrative control slipping, the mental arithmetic changed. On one Vought bridge, a murmured argument broke out. "If we press this and fail, the cost at court will be intolerable," one officer said to his commander. "We have already shown too much. If we retreat, we admit that these juveniles and their caretakers have defied us with impunity," the commander retorted. "If we die here, there will be no one left to insist we were right," the officer replied quietly. Strategic cowardice and flickers of conscience merged into something like prudence. On the human side, no one could hear the murmured arguments on the Vought bridge. They saw only data, formation shifts, power output drops, vector adjustments. Argus, faster than any flesh, extrapolated. "Vought Helios formation reducing thrust toward inner system," it reported. "Orientation adjusting away from primary conflict zone. Probability of organized withdrawal rising." Joes kept his voice level. "Do not pursue," he ordered. "Shadow at distance. Keep drones on them. Make sure the whole galaxy sees them leaving." Harbor Light's internal alarms gradually fell silent one by one. Emergency lights dimmed back to normal levels. In shelters, children unclenched their fists and opened their eyes, realizing that the thunder had stopped. Lena sat down abruptly, her legs giving out. "They are going away," The boy whispered. For now, Lena said. She felt simultaneously 6 years old and 100. Tears stung her eyes, not of fear this time, but of a complex, messy relief. Hava finished patching a minor hole breach in the mid-bay with quick-setting foam and looked at the rows of sleeping children. You get to wake up in a world that said no, she murmured. On Earth, screens bloomed with images of Vok ships swinging around, their drives flaring as they accelerated away from the graveyard. Erie's broadcast ran replays of Lena's speech, of the barrier of junk swinging into place, of Paloon's ultimatum. Nari Rumgun, standing amid a crowd outside Earthline headquarters, watched the retreat and felt something unclench in her chest. They blinked, she said to the person next to her. Not enough, came the reply. No, she agreed. But enough to prove they can. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy reeled. Turcid and other polities petitioned for inquiries into Umbra Silex. Leaked logs from that and other facilities made their way into a burgeoning transgalactic framework of justice. The Vok Imperium issued stilted statements about rogue elements and misinterpreted protocols, trying to distance the core regime from the ugly details. Helios Axis fired a slew of executives and claimed corporate ignorance. Solari Drawson, under joint Earthline Turcid protection, began the slow process of testifying in venues that had never before considered the crimes of memory theft and cognitive mutilation at this scale. Harbor Light did not go quiet. It evolved. The emergency pods became dormitory wings. The playdomes turned into classrooms. Children learned history that included their own suffering, contextualized not to trap them there, but to give shape to what they had survived. Devia Korin worked with countless families on Earth and beyond to arrange placements for those children who could not or did not want to stay at Harbor Light. Adoption laws across multiple jurisdictions twisted themselves into new shapes to accommodate multi-species guardianship. Lena Corvo stayed. She chose to remain on Harbor Light as both a student and, increasingly, an advocate. She joined Elena in carefully curated memory recovery sessions, sometimes stepping in to offer peer support to younger children who were scared. In one such session, months after the battle, she finally pushed through a patch of the fog in her own mind and saw with searing clarity a Vok officer standing over her as she lay wired to a machine. He had looked down with an expression not unlike boredom and said in accented trade cant, "If this does not take, she goes in the bin." Waste disposal does not care about faces. The memory slammed into her present like a wave. She gasped, her fingers clawing at her own skull. Elena held her, letting her shake. "You are not in that room," Elena said, her voice steady. "You are here on Harbor Light. He is gone. You are not." Lena sobbed, then laughed, the sounds tangled. "I want to find him," she said when she could speak. "We might," Elena said. "But even if we do not, you have already beaten him." "How?" Lena demanded. "You were supposed to die quietly," Elena said. "You survived loudly." News feeds would echo that phrasing for years. Erie's final report on the crisis ended not with the retreating silhouettes of Vok ships or the thunder of legislative gavels, but with a quieter scene. She stood in a harbor-like corridor, her camera pointed toward a window. On the other side, in a gravity garden where centrifugal force simulated up and down, children played among floating vines and artificial sunlight. Human kids chased Aravi kids, laughing. A Turcid volunteer tossed a ball high, and a hybrid child with faint ridges along their temples leaped to catch it, their legs kicking. Erie spoke over the image, her voice softer than in her earlier broadcasts. "They dumped something in our sky," she said. "They thought it was waste. We opened it and found 12,000 children instead. We still do not know what the long-term cost of that choice will be. We know only that we made it, and that we will have to live with the consequences together." The camera panned slowly, catching Lena for a moment as she stood to one side, watching the game with a thoughtful expression. The girl noticed the lens, met it, and offered a small, wry wave. "People say humanity stepped onto the galactic stage when our ships first left our orbit," Erie went on. "Maybe that is true in a technical sense. But if you ask me, we really arrived when we took someone else's hidden crime, cracked it open, and said, these are our children now, too. The feed cut to black. On monitors and data pads across worlds, the story lingered. Far away, in places where Umbra Silex's shadow still fell, others who had been used as recording devices in the Imperium's service heard whispers of Harbor Light and its children. Some began to hope where before they had only resolved to endure. On Earth, in a small cafe in Nairobi, Declan Roden sat alone at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold again. He watched Irish report on his handheld and listened to his own face being woven into a myth he had never meant to inhabit. He remembered the first plot from Argus, the containers drifting in, just another problem. He remembered the moment the hand hit the viewport. He thought of how close, in the cold calculus of fear and pragmatism, they had come to doing nothing. I do not know if we are ready for what we started, he murmured. He also knew, in a bone-deep way, that they had had no real choice, not if they wanted to be the people they claimed to be. Outside the window, the elevator ribbon to Nairobi Spindleport glinted in the sun, a steel thread connecting ground to sky. Along it, cargo and people moved up and down. Among them would always now be some trace of the children they had pulled out of the dark. Somewhere beyond, the Vok Imperium smoldered over its failed containment. Solari's documents hinted at other facilities, other disposals not yet exposed. The conflict was not over. It might, in some ways, never be over in his lifetime. But the shape of the future had changed. When someone used the word contaminated now, more and more people heard not disease, but truth. And on a station hanging between Earth and the stars, a girl who had once been slated for the bin walked barefoot through a gravity garden, thinking about memory and justice, and the strange, stubborn species that had opened her coffin and refused to lock it again.